I met on this fest for Wiborada somebody who is very interested in this woman, and she will tell us how she found to this interest.
So my partner came to St.Gallen for a sports competition, and he insisted that I come with him. And in order to bribe me, he gave us an extra day for sightseeing. And we didn't know anything about St.Gallen. And when we arrived and we realized what an enormously important place it has been historically and religiously, I was so overcome by everything. And I, of course, visited the Abbey. And then I saw Wiborada's cell at St.Gallen. And I was really, really, really struck, like just vibration in all of my body. And on the way home, which is almost 5 hours on the train,
To Geneva.
to Geneva, yes, I was just staring out the window and my brain was just running with so many ideas, so many stories I wanted to write about the things I had seen. So I got home and I began researching, I began buying books.
Mainly about Wiborada.
Yeah, about Wiborada, but also about... So it began about Wiborada, and then I started researching about the other women spiritual leaders. So after Wiborada, there were other women who decided to be inclusorin, and then there were the beginnings who were, much later in the Middle Ages. And I started reading about the textile industry, and so I kept seeing references to pre-Christian Germanic beliefs. And I thought, what is that? How is that relevant to the story of St.Gallen? So I kept digging and digging and digging, and I started going into the scholarly literature and reading very, very old folk tales and old fairy tales and legends and Norse legends. I mean, I really kept digging, and I was so busy that I quit my job just so I could focus. And then I wrote to the women here in St.Gallen to ask the Wiborada project if I could stay 1 week in the cell as a favor, kind of. So they let me come, and so I came with the bread and carrots and muesli, and I lived on these things for 1 week. And
you were here in the...
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah, and I just stayed in the cell to get the experience, and it was really, really powerful.
This is the house they rebuilt somehow, how Wiborada could have lived in her time, 1,100 years before she was killed. And but what was it that made you so interested in Wiborada, that you on way back you was thinking, what was taking your heart?
So I was a humanitarian for a long time, living in places where it was not safe to go outside, certainly not safe to go into the mountains. When I came to Switzerland, and there's beautiful roads, you can ride your bicycle everywhere, everything is safe, you can go hike. I was so pleased. And then I had injuries with my feet. And so I'm not really able to go running and do the things that I used to do, and I was so disappointed. I felt like my life is over. And then I came here and I saw someone who chose, in all of this beauty, she chose to live in this box. And I could not understand why, because I would never do it. I would never do it. So this question, for me, the only way I can think about something is if I write about it, especially if I create a story and I give my characters that problem. I give them the question, and then they can find the answer for me. So I set my characters with this task. Find me the answer. Why someone would live in a box? Is it a good life? And so I sought to understand that. Yeah.
And how you started the book about Wiborada? You read a lot about her life?
I did, but there's not a lot, actually. So I read what I could, but there's really not much. So I tried to read other things about that time period and how people would be living. So the title of the book is Spindle.
Spindle.
Yes, and the spindle is the thing when you're spinning
I know what it is.
this thing. Because women spend so much time spinning all the time, because they had to make all the clothes that we wore. So one thread by one thread they had to spin, then they had to weave. And this they were doing in Wiborada's time. And so I also started to study about the textile industry in St.Gallen and the connection between all these powerful women who were such spiritual leaders, but they also had this very pedestrian thing they had to do all the time, and then St.Gallen becomes a center of spirituality and religious learning, but also a major textile center in the world. And women are always fighting for equality, and it's very difficult for them to get, and they make an advance. Like the beginning women started to economically be very strong because of spinning, and then the men took it, and the beginnings had to leave. So it's this this story. What is the slogan we have from this morning? Kirche mit den Frauen, and
Church with women.
and it's still an advocacy point after all of these years, like more than 1,000 years. So I just started doing these researches and digging more, understanding more, making these connections. In my story, there are two sisters. And one sister is a trainer for artificial intelligence. She lives in Bern.
So you put this in our time?
Yes. The other sister is a professor of medieval studies, and she specializes in the old manuscripts, trying to understand when the monks were making copies. Did they make mistakes? Did they make mistakes on purpose? How did they interpret the real life and put it in the manuscripts? And when they created new manuscripts, sometimes they used the old ones inside. So what are these lost things? This is the sister's research. So one day she goes missing. And so the sister who studies artificial intelligence, who trains artificial intelligence, she has to go looking for her sister, but her sister has left her some clues. And so the sister starts doing the research, just as I was doing the research. And she finds that her sister has been lost in the 10th century. And so she has to travel back in time and to find her sister. That's how the story goes.
It's just like life could be today. She sees her sister and she wants to understand her, what kind of world is this? And then, who discovers more from the both sisters?
Well, I can't tell you because then you'll know. But it's to me it was also the question of how we know what we know and how we believe what we believe. How we believe what we believe. So one sister finds all of her answers using artificial intelligence. If she needs a new idea, she asks the app. If she has to make a connection between points of information, she asks. But there's a limit to what this app will know. Because the artificial intelligence only has the information we've given it, and it doesn't know what life was like in the 10th century, because we don't know. So there are things about ourselves as humans and our human history it can never tell us. But the sister was always trying to find out. The other sister who studied the medieval ages, the Middle Ages, she travels back and she meets, of course, Wiborada, who is like artificial intelligence because she can see things that nobody else can. So it's also this question of who you believe and how you think critically for yourself and how you know what is the right information for you. So why would you believe a machine, or why would you believe a prophet, a woman who's living in a box and just maybe doesn't know anything except what's in the box? But people at different times believe these different things.
So you have to understand for yourself what is going on with this artificial intelligence, and also what is human being to have relation to the spiritual world, how it can work.
Yeah. And I try in my book, I try to give clues to the sister, but also clues to the reader. So I am not very didactic, not very clear with the reader. I want the reader to take from this what they need, what makes sense to them, without telling them, because I think that we all find our own answers in life, right? I think it can be very personal how we go through life and how we make sense of it, how we understand ourselves. And of course, our relationship to our spirituality has to be very individual. So we will look at the same information and we'll take something unique. The danger of artificial intelligence is that it will give the same answer. It's not special to you, to things that it can't even know about you. Well, some people think it's knowable, but I don't think so.
And Wiborada, she was educated, she could read.
So the historical record is not clear on that, because at that time most people would not be able to read and write, and certainly not women. So if you were literate, it was because you were a monk and you were living in a monastery. But we know that her brother, who became a monk and a priest, that he taught her the Psalms and she could recite them. So she could recite the entire liturgy. But maybe she could also read and write. But there's kind of a question mark.
Yeah, at that time they learn very easy by heart. I know they are in Islam, the Hafiz, they know the whole Quran by heart. It's impossible today to think, but they are still.
And also I think her cell was very dark most of the time. She did sometimes have candles, but yeah, even if she was reading and writing, it would have been limited, I think, by that practicality, because also when she lived, candles were quite rare and quite expensive. Mostly just the church was using candles.
So you think she did something like meditation? Or?
For me, I don't know, because it's I don't know. People say that she did possibly, of course, prayer, mostly prayer, and she also listened to people and spoke to people through her window.
Yeah.
They think she did handicrafts. She used to help bind the books for the monks. They would pass the books through the window, and then she would do the bindings, which was a lot of work and was a real skill.
But your question that how can somebody in a cave for 10 years, free decision, she must have something that gives her pleasure, that gives her life, that gives her a sense to stay there.
To have meaning.
I think she had like an inner cave where she could visit the universe, the heaven, just enjoy.
Yeah, it's very interesting you say that. It's something similar like that in my book as well. I think she traveled in ways. I think so.
Sleeping on hard bed.
Yes, and it was interesting for me to stay there because on the last couple of days, I told myself I should close all the windows and pull the curtains because I had been keeping the window open, but she would have had just a small square. So I covered everything, so I had just this small piece of window up at the top. and it changed everything. It changed the feeling of it completely. Yeah, and I realized in that environment, you can go inside yourself so deeply and so much more than if you find a quiet place in the garden. It's really different. And I could imagine that if you did that for many years, you would achieve this deep level of meditation that is almost imaginable, but would give you a kind of spiritual power that is truly unique.
So your book is almost finished.
So when is a book ever finished is the question. I think when it's actually printed, then you must say it's finished. But until then, every time you open it, you think, I have to change it. But I've been sharing it with readers for a few months now, and getting some of their thoughts back. So I would say it's very close to what I feel comfortable with.
And it will be in English and also produced in America?
I am looking for a publisher, but it's in English.
But translations are easy nowadays. By Kai.
Yeah. But it's translation is really an art. It's really an art form, you know. But I don't know if this would be of so much interest to Americans, but I'm not sure, because it's a very European story. Because I go a lot into European history and European folklore and fairy tales. So I'm not sure.
But her brother was, of course, I think, reading, studying the theology.
Yeah.
And she traveled once with him to Rome.
Yes. Yeah, I think they did the pilgrimage.
This must have a very special happening. They met a lot of people. I think he was also an interesting person.
I think so.
The brother. So they had a good time.
I think so, and she also had she was very close with her servants, who stayed with her for her whole life.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, she had 2 servants. They were dear friends, and when she spent 4 years in St.Gallen, before she had the permission to be an incluser in here, she lived with them, with the 2 servants.
She
lived with them?
Lived with them.
Yeah, in St.Gallen. And then when she was here in St.Gallen, she had a very dear friend named Rachilda, who also decided to become an anchoress in one of these places. And in fact, she was, I think she was carried away, so she was saved from when the Magyars came. But then she survived, and then she lived a long time in the cell. I think because Wiborada spent 10 years, and then her friend, I think, spent an additional 20 years. She was, I think, 27 years. In the anchor hold. It was a very long time.
In the anchor? But she was killed here.
Yeah.
Wiborada.
Yeah, Wiborada.
Because she didn't want to leave the town.
Yeah. She said that she had a prophecy and that she saw that she needed to stay. Yeah.
And she could warn the monastery to save the books before they came.
Yeah.
She had 2 servants. I want also to have 2 servants.
Well, you know, at that time, you had to be wealthy to become an anchoress like this. You had to be wealthy because you had to pay someone to continue to take out, I mean, she had some way for a toilet, right? Probably she had to keep passing something out the window. And to get the food and water, you know, someone has to do that for you, and you have to buy the food. Obviously you are not making money there, so she had money, in order to do that.
Now the president of St.Gallen, woman, Maria Papa. from social party.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah, it was a special thing that St.Gallen chose an immigrant.
Oh, is she? Wow.
She's from Italy, yes. Well, he makes good work. So you grow up in Geneva?
No, I grew up in the United States.
That's why you speak English.
Yeah. But I left when I was 20 years old. So I spent more than half my life outside.
As a humanitarian
Yeah.
helper.
Mostly, yeah.
Yes, yes. This would be another story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it recording?
Yes, thank you very much for telling me. The author will be of this book, the name?
Dara Passano.
Dara?
Dara Passano.
Dara Passano. Yeah, maybe somebody looks this film and waits for the book.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I would publish it.
Thank you very much.
I'm not an agent.
I'm not a publisher.